Okay, good morning. Today is the 8th of ER, and I guess that means it's the 28th of May. And we're holding by this mimer that we didn't learn for a whole week because I had the flu. Okay. So we learned the whole meditation that he had here, the whole kavana that he had here. He said b'chol levavcha is the animal soul, b'chol nafshecha is the intellectual soul, and b'chol modecha is the divine soul. And that what the divine soul gains from coming down into this world is the b'chol modecha, is the ability to break through barriers. What that means is that the divine soul is limited before it comes down into this world. So even though it's divine, it doesn't know. So it's kind of like a contradiction. How do you explain that? Why couldn't it learn about breaking barriers where it was already? If there's no difference between this world and the spiritual world because they're both limited. So the answer is that here we have something that it's pushing against. And that's the only way to learn how to break through barriers. That's why it's so important for the person to not give into his animal soul. And every day he needs a new intellectual soul in order to do that. But the whole point is that you can't learn how to break barriers in the spiritual world. Because in the spiritual, there's nothing to push against. And there was a sikha that the Rebbe once explained this in terms of going into outer space, that in outer space there's nothing to push against. So if you want to change your course, your direction, you have to throw something out. So so you explain that's what happens in this world. In this world you work hard and you push against the animal soul, you push against the negative, and so slowly you begin to amass success in that area. And that's what you take with you into the world to come, back into the spiritual world. And that you take back into your spiritual world, that's what you can later use to continue to change your course even in the spiritual. So that you're not on a single trajectory, but you can actually change direction there. Okay.
Where are you on the page?
So we're on Bet, chapter 2. Okay? Before we come up to Kriyas Shema, we have to say the Psalms that are Psuke de Zimra. Why? What do they do? So now we're back to the original intent of this mimer. Im Bechukotai telechu. If you walk in my statutes, and Chukotai we explained is in the sense of engraving, lachkok, and Bechukotai means two types of engraving. So what are these two engravings? Now, this is where this mimer gets really new, like really stuff. I mean, up till now it's been very novel, but here it's very interesting. So there are two engravings that you need to do. כמו כלי, שצריך חקיקה מבחוץ ומבפנים. Just as a vessel needs to be engraved from the inside and the outside. So what do you do on the inside? On the inside, the engraving is not exactly engraving. You polish it. You're supposed to polish it to make it very smooth on the inside. And then on the outside, there might be more coarse graving, but there's still engraving. So you have to work on the inside and the outside of every vessel. So, כמו כן צריך כלי הנפש הבהמית לשתי חקיקות הללו. וכדי שאחר כך יוכל להיות בחינת תלכוש ובחינת אהבה. So the animal soul also needs these two types of engravings, like it's a vessel, in order that afterwards it can attain the level of telechu. Telechu means that you'll be able to be a mover, someone who moves, who walks. Shu b'chinat ahava, and that is love. Litkalel be'echad, to be it, like we learned a few times, that it, Hashem Elokechem, le'ava et Hashem Elokechem, like we learned before here. Et here is that it's, he said, tefele, that you become like something that's just attached, like another addition to the love of Hashem. That's all, meaning the love makes you one with Hashem, like you're something tefele Hashem. Like Avram achieved this level, which is called haloch v'nasa. Everything that he does is a run and return, hanigba, to come to love of Hashem. Hanigba, he explains this in previous articles many times. Hanigba, the south, is always a symbol for love of Hashem. Okay, so what's this big deal about love? Why do we need to get to this love? So he says it's because otherwise you're not attached. Love causes attachment. And this is a very important thing, because usually most people think about love as something like a romantic. But we've discussed this many times, that love is really an affinity for something. That if I love something, it means that I'm close to it, meaning I'm similar to it. Especially here where it's le'ava et Hashem Elokecha. That it's to become like attached to Hashem, that the love attaches you, makes you like another appendage to Hashem. What's going on here? They didn't know about, somebody asked me on Shabbos, because we learned a similar mimer. How do you what does love of Hashem mean by the Rambam, for instance? How would you learn Rambam? So how do you define love of Hashem? How does he define it?
Same as everybody else, basically.
Which means?
To do what he wants. To do his
right. To do his bidding. There's no special difference there, because love and fear, they lead to the same thing, which is an emotion that I want to be like Hashem, that I want to do what Hashem tells me to do. I want to follow Hashem. It's just that I can do it out of love or fear, but the end result is the same. And you see here that it's not the same. Love is attachment to become part of Hashem. It's something entirely different. It's not just to follow the mitzvot. So let's explain it a little bit more. That really what they called love, and in fact in the Tanya he addresses this, because he says that the fear of Hashem also contains love. So he says, what does that mean? It means, like in the previous generations, when they wanted to do what Hashem wanted them to do, when they wanted to follow Hashem's will, they first of all felt fear of Hashem, and then they felt attached to Hashem because they had followed what He had said. But that's not the love that the Baal Shem Tov talks about. It's something entirely different. Why? Because by them there's always distance. There's always distance in the sense that, like a regular person, when he does mitzvot, what does he feel? He feels that he's obligated to do this, and he's fulfilling his obligation.
He has awe of Hashem, which gives him.
And even the love of Hashem, when you say love of Hashem, is still not that I want to be, let's call it like as colloquially as we can, I don't want to be his friend. All I want to do is fulfill my obligation. And the person is very serious about this, and most people are. But in the end, there's no connection. There's no heartfelt connection. There's only awe in the end. In the end, awe overrides everything, because the awe includes the love, which is an attachment. But it doesn't mean that I want to be connected to Hashem in the emotional sense. That's not how they understood love of Hashem. Now, I didn't have time to go over all the Rishonim, but I don't remember a single. I don't remember. It doesn't mean much because I don't remember much. But I don't remember that a single Rishon talks about this in that way. Maybe the Chovos HaLevavos does, but I don't remember that anyone does. What it means to love Hashem in the sense of to feel that I can be connected to Hashem in the way that I would be connected to a person. So let me explain what I mean. Usually when you are a friend of someone's, when you really love someone, you open up to them. That's the big difference between love and awe. that with awe you wouldn't open up. You would never open up to a king. You would never tell the king your problems. You would never tell the king how much you're enjoying his rulership, his kingship. You would never be intimate with him.
The people going to Yechidus with the Rebbe, and they feel close to him. They're in awe of him, but they're close to him. They tell him everything.
Well, it's a big question if they really told him everything, but let's say they did, it's because he encouraged them. Right? So he developed the love. Okay? It's something that he had to prod them to do. It wasn't something that they normally did. But anyway, you're as they say, you're crashing into an open door, because the whole point of Chasidus was this is exactly the same way that you should feel towards Hashem. You have awe, and yet on the other hand, you feel that this is the one place where you can unpack your heart. And that's what V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha was supposed to achieve. It was supposed to achieve the fact that you could talk to Hashem as if you're talking to your best friend. That's what the Baal Shem, that's his big chiddush. That the Hashem is also who you. So you still have the awe, but amazingly you also have love. And when you have love, you can become part of Hashem because you open up to Him. You can actually speak to Him. How many people speak to Him now? I don't know. But I think that most people do. Like that was the whole change that Chassidus created. That wasn't something, for instance, with a rabbi, it wasn't common 300 years ago that somebody would walk in and say, I have these problems. Because he'd look at him and say, what do you want from me? The whole idea that there's someone listening on the other side, not just listening, but also interested and wanting to help and saying to you, this is what our relationship should be about, that was the chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov. When you think about what the Baal Shem Tov changed, that was the whole change in leadership. That as much as you have awe of him, you also have love. And so this is a very important thing. So it's to be walking all my days hanegba, to achieve more and more love, more and more openness with Hashem. And that has to happen on the animal soul. V'inyan ha'chakika mib'chutz, or the psukei dezimra, shu mishon zamir haritzim. So the engraving from the outside, which is coarser, that's done by psukei dezimra. Because what does that do? That tears down, it cuts down the aritzim, the parts of the animal soul that is exercising power over you. פירוש, על ידי התבוננות בגדולת אינסוף ברוך הוא בפסוקי דזמרה, הוא מזמר ומחריט בחינת הרע שתוכל להתפשט בנפשו בחינת אהבה אלוקית. So it says you have natural love inside, but it can't get anywhere because it's always hampered by the dominance that the animal soul has over you. The animal soul makes you afraid. It makes you afraid that if you don't follow what the animal soul says, who knows what's going to happen to you. And by the way, that's exactly the problem with doctors, for instance. Because what do? They scare you into doing what they want you to do. He says you shouldn't have a doctor like that. That's one of the reasons why the Rebbe wanted you to have a friend, a Rofei Yadid, who doesn't need the control over you. He's not interested in that. You're his friend. You've already opened up to him. It's something else. But usually when you go into the medical system, the question is, how much power can we have over you? It's a very important question there. It's not just something, why? Again, it comes from the good thinking. If we have control over you, you'll do what we say, and then it'll be easier to treat you, and so on and so forth. But that's not always the right thing. Sometimes the right thing is, let it be. You don't need any control over him, because you don't have to actually control him at all. So the animal soul has a lot of dominance over us because of that. כי ההתפעלות מהתבוננות הנ"ל עדיין אין זה בחינת אהבה, רק בחינת התפעלות מאלוקות, בכדי שיתפרד הרע. All this does is it says there's something greater that has greater dominance over you, called Hashem, rather than the animal soul. So this is still yira at some level. This is not exactly yet love, he says. So the chakika mibachutz, the engraving from the outside, is still something that's closer to yira. כדי שיתפרד הרע, כי דכתיב רממות אל בגרונם וחרב פיפיות באדם, היינו על ידי בחינת ההתבוננות ברממות יתברך נפרד הרע. Because what does the evil inclination describe like in the Zohar? He's walking around with a big sword, And he's, it says that even before a person's about to depart from this world, this is what does he see? He sees a Yetzer Hara with a very, very big sword coming to kill him. This is almost, he's going to die anyway in a minute. What does he care? No, a person's still afraid of that. If God forbid, like his thinking, he has so much dominance over me, that if God forbid I admit, for instance, that I wasn't kosher, I wasn't good, who knows what will happen. But on the other hand, if I admit that Hashem is a tzaddik, and the other side of this equation, and that life was actually good, it was I who did things that caused me pain, so that also is going to be terrible. So to the last moment, he stands over you with a sword, and he says the repercussions of you not following what I say are going to be terrible. He says, no, the whole thing is, what should you be able to admit? That Hashem is Melech, that's all. And that's very hard to admit. So for that you have Psukkah de Zimra. Just read the last sentence. That's why in the time of the Mishnah, they didn't have Psukkah de Zimra. They didn't say this. It was added in the time of the Talmud. Why? Because in their time, the Yetzer Hara didn't have such dominance, because the Reshimu, the residue of the temple, still existed. And we've learned Maimarim where it explained that during the time of the temple it was impossible for a person to completely follow his animal soul, because it didn't have such dominance, because the Shechina was still apparent. So there was always something against the animal soul. There was always something clearly present here, that Hashem is here just as much. So they didn't need the Psukkah de Zimra. They didn't need to cut down the animal soul that much. So that's called the engraving from the outside.